Greetings, all. I hope you all are doing well. Welcome to our last week of our Drama in English course, week 13. I just have a few quick announcements I want to go over. First of all, the only assignment this week is to finish reading Water by the Spoonful if you haven't already. And there is a discussion post question posted on Blackboard that I would like you to respond to. So if we open this, again, if you want to watch the production, it's still posted there um, along with the text. And a couple questions I came up with. You have your option. Why do you think the play is called Water by the Spoonful? Um, Scene 10 depicts the eulogy that Elliot and Yaz provide for their for Elliot's Aunt Ginny. The scene also depicts Odessa pouring spoonfuls of water on the floor and orangutan waiting for a train. I wonder if you can explain why these three scenes are being juxtaposed in this scene. Um, In scene 12, Yaz says, "Why is this family plagued? How is this play's miasma similar to that of Oedipus or Antigone?" That idea of family trauma, I think we've kind of traced in a lot of the plays that we've read for this semester. So I'm just wondering, kind of what it looks like in this play. Or what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of representing online conversations in this play? How would you imagine kind of staging it differently or similarly to maybe you could even compare it to the Texas State University production? And then finally, in Yaz's words, I want you to pinpoint the first time you really noticed dissonance. Um, and yeah, I'm just taking this assignment that she gives to her students and basically asking you to do it. So the composer, the piece, the measures, analyzing the notes, and describing the experience personally. This is your creation myth. Before you leave this school, you better figure out that story and cling to it for dear life, or you'll be a stockbroker within a year. Um, so, yeah, pretend that Yaz is talking directly to you. How would you respond to that? And please also don't forget to reply to two of your classmates. Sorry, this should say Friday. I will go in and change that. But please reply to two of your classmates by Friday. Um, the other thing I want to bring to your attention this week is that I am making the final exam live as soon as possible, partly because the due date for you guys is a week from this Thursday. So I figure giving you an extra few days to have a chance to look at it couldn't hurt. So just to show you how to access this, excuse me, um, if you go back to the course content page and scroll all the way down right under week 13, you'll see this link that says final exam date, Thursday, April 30th. That's when our final exam was initially scheduled for. It was going to be 8 to 10 a.m. And that is actually when this is going to be due for you as well. So the exam is here. I'm also posting a Word document of the exam and a PowerPoint that kind of goes over the exam. I will go over that in this video in a moment. But I would encourage you to download the Word document from the exam first. And, it's an open book take-home quiz. So, take the time to look up the answers if you don't know them for the multiple choice and short answer. And then kind of be prepared with those when you go in to actually take the exam. And I'd also strongly encourage you to write out the answers to the passage analysis questions, like on a Word document or somewhere else, and then copy and paste them into the exam once you're ready to actually submit the exam. And I say this just because, I wouldn't want you to be, taking an hour and a half into this exam and then have the internet crap out on you and you lose everything that you wrote and you have to do it all over again. So especially for these passage analyses where I'm asking for a more of a lengthy response, I would encourage you to write those elsewhere so that you have them. um, Again, this final is set up exactly like the midterm. There's going to be 10 multiple choice, which are worth 4 points each, 10 short answers, which are worth 2 points each, and then 5 passage analyses questions, where I'm basically asking you to tell me how that passage fits into the plot of the play, kind of what's going on around the plot, and then tell me what themes are being expressed or introduced in this particular passage. So The other thing I wanted to go over in this video was just walk you through the PowerPoint that I posted. So if you click on this link, again, this includes a lot of the information I just went over. Again, the only other thing I want to point out here is on the passage analysis questions, please make sure that your answers are in paragraph form. In other words, don't just, I'm going to go over a few things in this video on this PowerPoint, but I don't want to just see that you've copied and pasted kind of what I wrote here. I want you to use complete sentences, provide as much detail as possible, especially if you expect full credit on these. So the first passage I selected is Yaz speaking in scene 7 in Water by the Spoonful. I'm not going to read this just in the interest of time, but I did again, I posted this online. You can go in and look at it. But in this particular passage, I think if you want to talk about the plot, you might mention that Elliot and Yaz confront Odessa in a diner, who's meeting with John, aka Fountainhead. Elliot recounts the story of his sister's death, Mary Lou, which he blames his mother Odessa for. Odessa couldn't give Mary Lou a spoonful of water when she had the flu because of her addiction. As a result, Mary Lou died. And also after this speech, Odessa offers her computer to help pay for the flowers at Ginny's funeral, which is again why they confront her in the first place. They want her to contribute to the flowers. So some themes here. Again, if you look in this passage, it's interesting that Yaz has this memory of Odessa saying, like, she's got to learn that y'all are cousins, y'all are flesh and blood, and we share everything. You hear me, Yaz? In this family, we share everything. So again, this might relate to the idea of family generational trauma. We learn later in the next scene, I think, when they actually go to Odessa's house, that Elliot himself also has this struggle with addiction. It looks different than Odessa's, but it might suggest that, like, Odessa's struggle with addiction is kind of a generational struggle, and her son is also dealing with it. It's also interesting in this passage that we learn that Mary Lou died of dehydration, but the memory that Yaz brings up here is one where they're all sharing a drink out of some straws. So it's a scene where Odessa actually is performing some kind of nourishment and offering hydration to counter that kind of dehydration that gets brought up in what Elliot remembers about his mother. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are other themes you can touch on here. This is just kind of what I'm picking out of this scene. The next passage I have here is from Wit. This is when she's kind of remembering when she gave a lecture on the Donne poem "If Poisonous Minerals." So again, some plot points here. Viv is receiving the full dose of 2 chemotherapy drugs. Here she recounts her lecture on the Donne poem. She explains how the speaker wants to hide from God's judgment. And some themes you might want to touch on in your response are this relationship between Wit and cancer. How, Viv is kind of fascinated with Wit and has dedicated her life to kind of being the person who can say the most about Donne and get at kind of the complexity of his work. And that's kind of also what Jason Posner is doing with cancer. He's trying to, like, figure out this puzzle that doesn't really have an answer. But Viv in this passage also might be reflecting on the fact that she is kind of like the speaker of Donne's poem, who does not need to hide from God's judgment, only to accept God's forgiveness, but he is still kind of hiding. He's trying to hide from God. So it suggests that Viv might also be trying to hide from God's judgment by dedicating her life to a study of Wit and Donne. And she also reflects a few times in this play about her kind of how her mannerisms with her students, which might also be related to how Jason Posner reflects on his, or doesn't reflect on his kind of bedside manner or lack thereof. So here she says, this point is nicely explicated in an article by Richard Stryer, a former student of mine who once sat where you do now, although I dare say he was awake, right? So she's kind of like insulting her students, like telling them that they're asleep in class, and remembering this as her lecture style. But again, maybe she's like thinking back on this with some kind of regret, a bit hard on her students. So again, I'm sure there are other themes here you can pull out, but that's some of my thinking here. The third passage is from Fences. This is Troy Maxon. This is in a scene where he's talking to Rose, Lyons, and Bono. Rose wants Troy to sign recruitment papers for Corey, and then Troy kind of launches into this reflection about his own father, and they're talking about why you're so hard on Corey, and he remembers his relationship with his father. And I think I talked about this in my lecture a couple weeks ago, but this is basically this moment where, in the same way that Troy usurps his son's dreams by like preventing him from having a chance to be a football player, in the same way that he was kind of denied a chance to be this great baseball player, because he wasn't allowed to kind of exceed the Negro leagues. He also is kind of thinking about his father here, who tried to usurp his place with Joe Canewell's daughter, because he remembers this being this moment where he was sleeping with this, or fooling around with this girl, and then his dad came and tried to rape her, basically. And so in a way, he's like talking about how he hates his father, but also seems to have, in a way, sort of become his father. So this idea of generational trauma. And Troy is also, it seems like he kind of goes back and forth between trying to protect his son from being ridiculed. He thinks that if Troy gets a chance to play football, he's just going to be seated on the benches because of racism. But at the same time, he's also maybe a little bit jealous of his son as well for maybe having a chance that he didn't. Fourth passage comes from A Raisin in the Sun. This is Walter, and this is after Walter has lost the money by giving it to Willie. He invites Mr. Lindner back over and is willing to accept Mr. Lindner's financial offer. Instead, Walter refuses the offer and explains to Mr. Lindner that he is proud of his family. This is kind of the first time in the play that he does that, which is why I think it's an important moment. He also moves from being shamed to being proud, if you're thinking about this thematically, from being willing to sell his soul to a racist to being willing to make a stand against racism. And Walter kind of lets go of his dream in order to help his mother live hers. So it's kind of an important moment for Walter's character. It's where he kind of shifts. And then the last passage here is also from Raisin in the Sun, earlier on in the play. This is when George Murchison shows up and is about to take Beneatha out. I think they're going to the theater, and he walks in sort of at this moment that she's dressed in these robes that Asagai has given to her. He's embarrassed to go out with her dressed that way, and he asks that she change her clothes. And I think this particular exchange that they have perfectly kind of embodies the idea of Beneatha's interest in rejecting assimilationism, which George sort of embodies. So it's George's assimilationism versus Beneatha's, integration or black nationalism, whatever you want to call it. Basically, her rejection of the idea that cultural heritage isn't important. The other thing going on here is that Beneatha also offers this really interesting kind of non-Eurocentric version of history, revising the narrative of Ashanti and Bantu-speaking peoples as primitive. She says they're the Africans were the first on the earth to smelt iron. The Ashanti were performing surgical operations when the English were still tattooing themselves with blue dragons, right? So revising this narrative of African populations as like primitive people. Good luck with this, guys. I just want to thank you guys for a great semester. I will try to check in with you next week, but please feel free to reach out. I hope you're all doing well, and thank you for a great semester.